taking your lunchtime to listen to this talk. We're fortunate to have Minglang Zhou here with us today to talk about minority policy in Northeast Asia. And as you know from the little blurb they sent out, he has a PhD in linguistics from Michigan State University. He's teaching now at the University of Maryland in the Language and Linguistics Department, teaching courses not just on Chinese, but on Chinese studies and Chinese culture, Chinese policy. So he's local, he's nearby. If you need to email or talk to him, there's a good chance you'll run into him again. As you know, he's the author of Multilingualism in China, The Politics of Writing Reform for Minority Languages, 1949 to 2002, and has edited several volumes on language policy in China. This, to me, is a fascinating topic as someone who studied Chinese in an area of China that wasn't specifically a Mandarin-speaking or Putonghua-speaking area. I studied Chinese as we were talking about this earlier today. I studied in Yunnan province in a city called Kunming, which is in the southwest of China. He's going to present on the northeast policy today. Even though they're sort of direct opposites, the questions are going to be similar. I studied Chinese at a so-called normal university, which, what does a normal university mean in China?
It's like a university to train teachers.
It's a teaching college. I say that here because in the Naval Academy, when we talk about a normal university, we mean anything that's not the Naval Academy. So I studied at a teaching college, and in Yunnan province, half of the population are Xiaoxun Minzu, that they're ethnic minorities in this province. So it's a province the size of France. And at the time, half of them were not Han Chinese. And at my school, they were mostly ethnic minorities. And what fascinated me, and I've always wondered about this, was the students who studied at the school, the Chinese students. When I'd ask them, are you Han Chinese? Some would say they're Bai or Yi or Hmong or Thai or something else that they were, or Nashi. But a lot of them said, well, I'm Han, but my parents weren't. And I never understood exactly how, and sometimes I'd press them and say, well, how could your parents be Han and you be something else? And they'd say, well, I went to a government school and I grew up speaking this sort of government, the official language of China, and I don't follow their customs. So there was this almost a kind of fluidity in their identity that was related to language that fascinated me at the time. And if I decided to study anthropology instead of history, I would have had a chance to investigate it. But with that as a segue, please let's welcome Zhou to Naval Academy.
Thank you. It's a great honor to share with you some of my excuse me, some of my thoughts on language use in multilingual China. Usually, I focus on the perspective on minorities, but this time I'm talking about the Han, how they, what their thoughts and how they interact with minorities. So my topic today is language order and language market. So Han's changing value orientations and language use in multilingual China. We'll look at two cases. So first, I'll give you an idea about what's language ideology and order and market. And then I'll focus on two cases. One is the Uyghur community. The other is the Tibetan community, and how the Hans use the language there. And I'll focus more on the concept of linguistic capital and markets, because when you talk about market, you talk about capital. So we'll see how that applies to those two communities, to the Hans there particularly, and we'll see how the market works. And eventually, when you have market, you have capital, you have then that involves value orientations. So that will be one of the focus here. So first, I'll talk a little bit about language ideology and order. So that's something probably you talk a lot, ideology, order. And here we'll think about language ideology. So basically, I think it is a system of ideas, assumptions, beliefs, and values regarding how we practice or whether we should practice multilingualism or monolingualism. For example, in the US, you know, this English-only movement. So that represents one of the ideology. And of course, there are other about multilingualism. So this is what we think and what we should do. And language order is something a little bit different. So that's an institutionalized hierarchy of two or more languages. It's institutionalized in a way in terms of access to resources. Let me give you an example. So in the US, Chinese used to be just a heritage language, like many heritage languages where so many people coming from so many different countries and linguistic backgrounds. As a heritage language, it relies on the own community to maintain, to sustain its development. However, you know, in the last 2 decades, that changed. And Chinese became one of the critical languages. So when it becomes a critical language, it's not just rely on the heritage community, it's part of the state's responsibility to ensure the state possesses that capacity. So then, of course, it has more access to resources. So this order is a representation of the beliefs, the ideology. So that has a lot to do with what kind of nation you want. So in China in particularly, language ideology and order serves nation-state building in the last 6 decades. In the early years of the PRC, it adopted what I call a Soviet model of multilingual state building. In that model, it means Hanyu, Chinese, as the linguistic gravity with minority languages as satellites. So there were 2 tracks. So Chinese were developing as the main track, with Putonghua as the common language for the Han, that's the majority only. And each minority group should develop its own common language. However, eventually, because they envisioned during communism, all the languages or the peoples will emerge into one. So that was the model at that time. So it was fine for minority languages, communities to develop their own language. So at that time, when the Han people live in Tibetan communities or live in Uyghur communities, they learn to speak minority languages. Of course, they speak Han too. However, there's a change. You know, the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 2000s. And after that, China realized that model doesn't work. So it needs a new model. And this new model is called Chinese model of one nation with diversity. So this model is essentially the same as our model here. Well, regardless of what language you speak, what ethnic racial background you have, we're all Americans. So the Chinese basically want to claim that we're all Chinese, regardless of what language or what ethnic background you have. So in this model, Chinese is the state's super language, and minority languages are becoming supplementary languages. So the policy is basically Chinese should be spoken in every domain, and everyone should learn to speak Mandarin. So if you're a minority, you're Tibetan, you're Zhuang, you're Uyghur, you should be able to speak, you should learn to speak Mandarin. And it becomes a duty of the citizenship in this model. So the question is, in the last 2 decades, do the Hans in minority communities still learn to speak minority languages as they did in the 50s, 60s, or even 70s? So that is a question. If they still speak minority languages, why? If you don't, why? So we have some questions. So we're going to look at 2 cases to see if we can find some answers. So we know language use always relates to ethnic relations. And we'll see what happens in Tibetan communities for the Han Chinese there. So one specific example is Lhasa Secondary School. So that was in the capital of the Tibetan Autonomous Region. I visited the school in 2001. So in this school, there are Tibetan students, there are Han students, and there's no requirement for the Han students to learn Tibetan. So the bilingual classes there are only offered to Tibetan students and not to the Han students. That simply means if you're the majority, you don't need to learn Tibetan. Not only the different classes, they are physically separated. So if maybe in different buildings, if in the same building, there are different floors. So maybe the first floor is bilingual Tibetans, and the second floor or the fifth floor are monolingual Han classes. So they're physically separated. So very much like segregation. And because they're physically separated in different classes, there's little or no communication between the Han students and the Tibetan students. So you can imagine this kind of environment. If you're the majority or Han, even if you want to speak Tibetan, you don't have an opportunity. So there's some tension between the Han students and the Tibetan students in the school. And this is the model school there. So when foreign visitors, scholars, you go there, you want to see the bilingual school, that's where they show you. So that should be the best example. That's the Tibetan case. We'll look at the Uyghur case. So Hetan County, 3rd secondary school. So I haven't had an opportunity to visit the school. I visited some schools in Kashgar several times. I was planning to go there, but I never made it there. By the way, it's more difficult to go there now. So in this school, it's very different. There's a requirement for Han students to learn Uyghur. If you're Han, the school requires you to take classes in Uyghur, and the bilingual classes are offered to both Han and Uyghur students. So if, say, there's a math class taught in Putonghua, both Hans and Uyghurs are there. And if there's another physics class taught in Uyghur, and they'll take the same class. In addition, there's no physical separation, not in separate buildings, not on separate floors, they're mixed. So of course, in that kind of environment, you can imagine they communicate. So they make friends. So this is the situation. So the question is why the Tibetan situation is totally different from the Uyghur situation in Khotan. There are some factors. Let's look at the Tibetan. Number one is the local language policy. Tibetan community used to encourage using Tibetan. However, in the last few years, the policy changed. The policy became first, at the very beginning, is Tibetan and secondary Mandarin. And then in the 2000s, it became both. And now, in the last decade, it's become Mandarin primary and Tibetan secondary. And it's also this school ethnic separation or segregation policy. So that is put the different students into different classes. And why? Because one of the school official reason, because the tension between Tibetan students and Han students, the kids, if they are in the same class, they fight. You know, high school, middle school kids sometimes fight, but they treat it that way. They say, oh, better just have them in separate. Another is the Han students there, they lack the belonging. They don't think they belong there. They think themselves as just guests there for a few years. Of course, the Uyghur situation is different because the policy is still you should learn both. And if you learn both, you should stay in the same school, the same class. So that's the policy. So the Han students there, mostly, they settle there. Their parents or grandparents settled there. They think they belong there instead of being a guest. So the question is, okay, we'll look at these two cases, look at all these factors. It's how they interact to affect students' value orientations and language use, right? We talk about ideology, our beliefs, our value orientations, and we'll see how that works. So basically, I want to look at this from the perspective of the relationship between linguistic capital and market. So if it has a value, it's a capital, then there should be market. So here I'll use some ideas, notions from Bourdieu as post-structure, postmodern theory. One thing I don't like postmodern theory is they make simple things more complicated, so you don't understand it. But they have some good concept notions, which, like linguistic capital, which are good. So I'll try to interpret them into existing linguistic concepts. So what linguistic capital simply means the capacity to produce linguistic expressions. Your ability to speak English, Chinese, Arabic, different linguistic modes for different markets. Here modes could be different languages, or could be different dialects. Could be regional dialects, could be social, economic dialects, upper class, lower class, southern, northern. You know when to use what for your benefit. Or you know how to speak to your superiors, how to speak to your equals. If you can't do that, you're in trouble. So that's simply what says linguistic capital. And linguistic market, the context of language use that govern the value of linguistic products is the context, whether in classroom or in a bar or in an office. And what they call linguistic habitus. So this is something equivalent to what I mentioned at the very beginning, ideology. Or it could be as abstract as ideology, it could be more concrete. So it's a subset of dispositions, beliefs, ideas we learned when we learn to speak a language. For example, at a very young age, your parents will never correct your mistakes when you speak English. However, there are certain situations that will correct you. For example, if someone gave you something, you did not say thank you, your parents will say thank you, right? Or say excuse me and say sorry. So those are the things about linguistic habitus. So your ideas about proper language use in a context. So these kinds of ideas will govern our language use and will make you think, what kind of linguistic product I should use more? Or should I use formal English more than casual English? This will influence you. So sometimes some speakers, even in a casual situation, may use more formal English than others. So this, because the ideas from young age on, from your family, from your school. So that's Bourdieus' ideas. I want to put them into current existing linguistic notions. So that is simply linguistic capital is the ability, right, to speak a language or your linguistic repertoire. You have many different codes in your repertoire. You have Chinese, Arabic, English. And for English, you have formal English, local English, maybe Baltimore English, etc. Linguistic market. So-called linguistic markers simply are the domains of language use. The idea will already have, for example, family. You know, in a family, you can speak more casually. Church, temple, maybe the most formal language, classroom, etc. So there are different domains. The domains match, it's a market. It matches the products. So so-called linguistic habitus are actually social cultural knowledge we use to govern our language use, right? So it's to say the right thing at the right context. So the question is, how do this operate to market, how it works on our orientations? And it's not clear in the post-structural, postmodern works. And so my proposal is, okay, it all starts with market. We'll see how it works in the market. Since we define markets as, okay, I thought I have laser octone. So since we define the market as domains, right? So we'll see how it works. I think there are 4 levels of linguistic markets. The first level is individual linguistic market. So there are traditional domains of language use, right? Like could be a family, could be a local market, could be the local temple, a local school classroom. And then there's what we call the larger linguistic market. That could be a regional set of individual markets. So in a larger area, could be in a county, could be in a state, and also involve those family, school, church, market, etc. And of course, the next level is the national level, like US, China, Singapore. They're all made of those domains, right? For example, what language do we use in schools? So we use mostly in English. And there are also certain classes we use French, German, Arabic, Chinese. That's the national market. And there is what we call the globalized linguistic markets. So this is the intersection overlap of national markets. For example, if we look at English, English is a capital in a globalized linguistic market. So it doesn't matter where you go, China, Singapore, Malaysia, Turkey, you know, English has a market, has a great value there. And that's why students are learning and it is taught there. And now so some of the other languages like Chinese, Arabic, now they become globalized too. They have certain value in the global market. So if we look at the domains, right, the different levels of markets and the domains make each market. So there's a question of stability, whether a market is stable. That means if the market is not stable, your capital could going up or going down. That's like the stock market. So if it's going down, people are not learning it. So individual market is always unstable. For example, if a language is only spoken in the family, that language is not stable. It has like a heritage language. Or if a language is only spoken in a temple or church, for example, like Latin, that's not stable. So a larger market, that is a chain of domains in a county or state, that could be stable, particularly if it has 3 or more interrelated individual domains. For example, if a language is spoken in the family, in a school, in office, in an area, that language market is stable. So national market, generally speaking, are always very stable or maybe expanding, like in China. Mandarin is the official national language, is expanding its market. Global markets, very stable. So in the history, you can see maybe Latin, you see Spanish, and you see English, right, going up and down. That's a span of a few hundred years. So it's very stable and it's expanding, like English. For example, I visited Malaysia this past summer. Seems to me now they regret when they want its independence, they should adopt English as its official language. Now they're doing some catching up because they realize it's global, the global market in its full. Okay, within those ideas, we'll go back, look at the Tibetan case. The Tibetan case is losing the educational linguistic market because in schools, Mandarin become the primary language, right? Tibetan is still there, but secondary. So it's losing that market. So because Tibetan is still used in the families, used in temples, but it's losing its balance because it's losing education domain, right? So religion still use this, family still use this, education now questionable, right? So education is questionable, it's losing that. However, Uyghur case is different. Still retaining the educational linguistic market, although it's changing. It's not very successful for the Chinese government to push for Mandarin education there. And the larger linguistic market, so in that sense, still not serious damage, because religion, home, education, basically they still use Uyghur, right? Okay, so they have a very stable market. There's no shifting at this stage. In the future, we're not sure. And those markets will influence your views, your values of the linguistic capital, and which language is worth more. So all the languages will have a market value. The more markets a linguistic capital has, the more value is. So English is the most valuable language because it has the most markets globally. And however, market is not all. There's a non-market value. The non-market value is more inside the speaker's home, your belonging, who you are. So that is not necessarily related to the jobs, opportunities. So there's a non-market value. And orientation. So the values may be something more material, more measurable. The value orientations, of course, you have material orientations. That you just look at the opportunities. It's good for you to get a good job, get promotion, etc. Right? Physical mobility, can I go to China to get a job? Can I go to Paris, get a good job too? And can I move up? Those things, right? Can I go on internet and using that language? The non-material orientation is more a sense of home. Is this part of my home? You don't care about the others. And how you relate to home, that's very important. For example, some people, they refuse. Even you go home, you refuse to speak your native language. However, if you have close relationship with your brothers and sisters, your people in your community, then you have a stronger relationship with home members. It's more likely you'll keep that language, regardless of its material value. And there are conflicts, right? Market values and non-market values may be conflict, but not necessary. Okay. Let's look at the Tibetan case. Han students' material value orientations. Tibetans of low value, of course, little use in Tibetan classes, in schools. If there's no use in the school, why do you learn this, right? And not much in government, too. And not in business. If you go to Lhasa, you'll find most of the business speak Mandarin, not Tibetan. So you look at all this, the Han students have material value orientation. That's all. No, why do we learn this? Right? So they don't consider Tibetan communities as home. Why? Because the Han officials, technical professionals, officials there are rotated on a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year base. You bring your family there, you'll never stay there forever. Business. If you talk with the business, Han business people there, they're not going to stay there long. They say, I'll make money, make some money, then go home. Go back to Sichuan or other places. And also college students. Because college entrance examination in China is very competitive. So, but it's regional based, province regional based. So in one place, maybe you are not good enough, but if you go to another place, maybe you will be the best. You can go to better schools because the quota is given to each province and region. So many Hans, they go to Tibet to go to high school and take the entrance examination there. They'll be so-so in Shanghai or Beijing. They'll be the best there. So they can go to Beijing University or Tsinghua, good schools. So they don't feel they don't consider Lhasa or Tibetan communities as home. The Uyghur case, okay, it has value because school use the language and government office use the language. For example, in the last few years, many local government has laws, regulations that if you get hired for civilian jobs in the government, you must be bilingual speakers, Mandarin and Uyghur. So there's value there, material value there, right? Business. So if you go to Kashgar, you'll find that business, they require people who are bilingual speakers, both Uyghur and Mandarin. So there's a material value for the Han, right? And also there's a non-material values for the Han too, because there are settlers there, like the Great West. You move there, you settle there. And also Kashgar, for example, very few immigrant business. Their business mostly there stay. And no college exam immigrants. People don't go there to get the opportunity because there are strict policies. So we look at compare the two situations, the value orientations, we can see that the Han students recognize both the market value and non-market value. So they take advantage of that. And both, of course, they have material and non-material value orientations. If you look at the Han students in Xinjiang, in the Uyghur communities, both value orientations play a role. Okay, my conclusion. So the national linguistic market and the larger linguistic market, that's in Tibet or in Uyghur communities, their relationships. So the national market has a huge pulling force, pulling towards the unification of one big linguistic market, that is Mandarin. And larger linguistic markets, they may vary. It depends on the value and the value orientations of the local. If they realize it has a lot of value of the local languages, they'll maintain it. And of course, we don't ignore the orientations, particularly non-material orientations. So they interact with each other. If you only have material value orientation, it may be in a certain way you can maintain the language to a certain extent, but if you have both material and non-material value and value orientations, that will be helpful to maintain the language and to develop the language. So they interact with each other. Okay. Let me conclude with a few words. The linguistic capital and markets and minority languages are very important for ethnic relations in China. So if a minority community think about adopting a policy that encourages the majority to learn its language, could be very beneficial. This is not very commonly considered in policy making in this kind of studies. Because in this way, you can increase the value. If the majority learn your language, increase the material value of your linguistic capital. And also, it increases the sense of belonging to that community for the majority. So it will be good for a larger linguistic market. Of course, it should be good for the state too. Right? The state doesn't want trouble. You know, there's a lot of trouble recently in Xinjiang. So promoting the minority languages among the majority will develop a healthy relationship. You can imagine if Tibetans, Han, they don't understand each other. They don't, particularly for the Hans, they don't learn Tibetan. They don't understand the Tibetans. It's not good for the state either. So it's good, actually, it's beneficial for the state to develop policies that encourage not just minorities to maintain their language, but majorities to learn the language too. So this is some of my references. If you're interested, and I have a copy here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
We have some time for questions, so please go ahead and ask some questions.
Yes.
So you talked about, in the case of the Tibetan language, how the Han, people from the Han community would come in, Han language community would come in, and there would be kind of tension between the two. The Han wouldn't learn the Tibetan language, wouldn't have a referral required to an education and whatnot. Do you think that that puts, like over time, would that kind of dynamic between the two put the Tibetan language in danger of becoming extinct?
That kind of situation does not increase the value, the material value particularly, of the Tibetan language. It might increase the non-material value for some Tibetans because you resist, right? So, but in the long term, if a language were doing well, if it has both good material value and non-material value. So I'm not sure if you noticed recently, Tibet passed a local regulation contrary to what happened at this described here. It encourages, awards Tibetan and Han interethnic marriage. That's a new development. It's very strange. But it's not strange. You think about this new nation-state building model. Yes.
So in the slide before your conclusions, you mentioned that the Uyghurs don't see the same college examination migrants that Tibetans do. Why is that?
This is very interesting. So I edited a book on affirmative action policy in China. One of the articles in that book talk about this is in Xinjiang, the policies, it has separate. It has ethnic-based policy. So because Xinjiang has a larger Han population, it's about 50. For a while, it was more than 50, 51, 52%. But because of the last few years, because of the tension, the violence there, I think it now probably is about 48 or 49%. So because of this competition, so they have separate tracks. So there was a case, for example, there were cases of Han educated in Uyghur schools. So they want to take the Uyghur exam. They did, and they got good scores. However, when it comes to the quota, the local community refused to give the quota to the Han because the quota is either Uyghur speakers or Mandarin speakers. So they said, okay, we'll give the quota to the Han who speak Uyghur, we'll lose the quota, right?
So they have the regional autonomy to control those quotas outside of Beijing?
The regional autonomy, of course, helps that. Actually, the leadership of the regional autonomy see the value for Hans to learn Uyghur. They want to reward the Hans learning Uyghur. They want to give them the quota to go to good colleges. However, the local community rebels against that practice. The local people only see, okay, if this school, if this county only has assigned 5 to go to universities in Beijing, right? They would like to see all of them are Uyghurs instead of, say, because the Han have a different separate Mandarin test. They have different quotas. They don't see the long-term, larger value. They're fighting for that specific slot.
Sir,
Yes.
is there something else for non-market value of a language other than like personal feeling for it?
Personal feeling it's the non-market value, right? It's how you feel you relate to that language. So that relates more. It could be maybe your friend. You have a friend who is Tibetan, Uyghur. You develop that relationship. If that is not market value, mostly it's market value because you take this language. There's a language in the military, in the Navy. But if it's not that, it's most likely you have a friend. So through that is non-market, non-material value and value orientation.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes.
One of the things that we did today in a history class, a pre-modern Asian history class, was we looked at the Tang Dynasty. And my question is a little bit related to looking at a map of the outlines of the Tang Empire. I realize your study is really only recent decades, and it's the PRC's policy toward language education policy. But I'd wondered, I found your theory about market value compelling, but I wondered in a broader historical sense, is it worth it to think about a matter of not just decades, but literally hundreds of years in terms of the value of languages in these regions? That Urumqi and, well, Xinjiang and that area now falls within what we call the Silk Road in English. And you would have had not just Chinese going out for hundreds of years into that area to trade and sell, but also people coming from the other way who are going to speak Uyghur, coming from Central Asia and other places who will learn Uyghur and find value. Whereas, and this is my question, is this different than Tibet, which is in a sense a lot more isolated by geography and history, almost this is not an elegant phrase, but almost a geographical dead end in terms of other groups coming in and learning Tibet? Is there that much less value in history, market value in learning Tibet, because it's not on what we think of as the northern Silk Road?
Yes, that's definitely a larger portion of the market value, the material value. But the material value doesn't explain all, because, for example, if you go to Tibet, so if you go by land, you drive, along the way you can see a lot of business operated by hands. They have very different views than the business operated by hands in Urumqi, Kashgar, or Altai. Into the Tibetan community, they were all, at least in my experience with them, nobody thought of this here. They all have the views, when I make enough money, I'll go back to Sichuan, or I'll go back to Shanxi. They have a very different mindset. So that mindset, I think, it's the non-material part. Of course, market has the material is the most forceful. The value is the most forceful. That's why you look around, so many people are learning English all over the world.
I think that's probably going to have to be it. If you have questions for Zhou, please stick around. I know you guys have to get to class, but let's give him one last.
Thank you. Thank you.
And on the behalf of Center for Regional Studies, a photo album of the Naval Academy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.